tal? Buenas tardes, sean todos bienvenidos una vez más a esto que es WARP Convoca, este ejercicio periodístico que hemos hecho a lo largo de la semana como parte de las celebraciones de nuestro aniversario y que, bueno, en este jueves llegan a su fin y lo hacemos, me atrevo a decir, de una manera espectacular y cerrando con broche de oro. Tenemos la presencia de puedo decirlo, nuestro colaborador estrella, Paul Stokes de Londres, Inglaterra, quien es editor asociado de Q Magazine y quien se encarga de todo lo que tiene que ver con el área digital de la prestigiada publicación inglesa que, vaya, es un estandarte del periodismo musical no solo en Londres, en Inglaterra, sino alrededor del mundo. Entonces, aquí está Paul, tiene mucho que decir. Vamos a empezar un poco repasando qué es lo que él hace, qué ha hecho con nosotros y luego ya entraremos en cuestiones un poco más específicas. Paul, how are you doing?
Hola, am I saying that right?
Great. It's your first time in Mexico.
Yes, straight off a plane this morning. I was dropped off at about 6 a.m. and it was still dark, so I'm kind of getting used to things. So.
Okay, I was telling to our audience that you're our collaborator from a couple of years ago, and that you're telling a little about what you do in your job as an Q associated editor. So. Why not you tell our audience what you do in your job and how did you arrive to WARP magazine?
Sure. Well, I'm an accidental WARP collaborator in a weird way, because I used to work at NME, which, if you don't know, is a British weekly music magazine. And about 4 years ago, these guys from Mexico came over to cover Glastonbury. And after Glastonbury, they arranged an interview with the editor of NME, a chap called Conor McNicholas at the time, to talk about Glastonbury and the significance of the festival. Unfortunately, Conor forgot that this interview was taking place, and this team turned up, and they were all set up in his office, and the press officer for NME came running over to me and said, "Could you do me a massive favour? Could you go and talk to them?" So it started in a very strange way, where I was asked questions, and a bit like this, and I was trying to come up with answers that I thought might be relevant or interesting to people in Mexico, and I thought I'd failed. Apparently not, because then a bit after that, I got an email from WARP saying, "Thanks for the interview. Would you like to write something?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not? Okay." So I wrote something. I can't remember what the first piece was, but I really like the fact, obviously, each issue has a bit of a theme. So people will be like, "Oh yeah, can you do this theme?" And then the next issue came around and said, "Oh, this is the theme. You know, ideas you've got?" So I was like, "Sure." And it's sort of snowballed since there to I get a email every month from your good self, and then you have to hassle me to send the copy in on time, and I eventually do, I hope. My actual job, which I do, I'm at Q Magazine, which is this thing here. I'm associate editor in charge of digital, which basically means I'm a sort of glorified website editor. When I was at NME, I used to run the news desk and the video content, so I was asked to come to Q, which is where I started actually, sort of 13 years ago. And I edit the website, I put the tablet editions together, I do some video when we have some budget. Q as a monthly is in a really weird place. A lot of the monthlies are, where trying to work out what you do online on a daily, minute-by-minute basis versus what you put out once a month is a strange thing. And I think our publishers and us as an editorial team haven't quite got to that point. So it's a kind of work in progress rather than a finished thing, but it does give me a lot of freedom, which is good.
Okay, and the young, the people in Mexico always ask us, at least in the WARP side, how do you guys get this fantastic job in the journalism? Because it's great. You get to know bands from all around the world and travel to festivals, and we always are like, okay, it seems very glamorous, but it doesn't. So what can you tell? Why you just tell us how do you get into the journalism?
Yeah, I agree. I think I once joked that if I ever wrote an autobiography, it would be called "Not as Glamorous as It Seems." I got into it mainly because I love music. When I was at school, I was massively into music. I was a real Britpop kid, so Blur and Oasis were sort of bands that came up when I was about 16, 17. And then when I went to university, somebody said to me, "Do you know what you want to do?" And I was like, I don't know, maybe journalism, I guess. And they said, well, what you should do if you want to be a journalist, even if you're not sure, is go and write for the student paper. So I was like, okay. So I went along to the first meeting, and the guy who did the music section stood up, and they were like, oh yeah, and if you write for us, and I was like, you get to keep the records. Oh, hello, I'll have a bit of that. So you got free records. So I honestly can say I got into music journalism for free records, and I continue to do that, which is good. Although I have bought some since. And I was quite lucky, really. I mean, it's a bit of a fluke, my career. I wrote for my student newspaper. I then did a postgraduate degree in magazine journalism, which, looking back after 13 years, seems crazy that you just specialise in magazines, because obviously I think the modern journalist has to do audio-visual, web, magazines, newspapers, Twitter, whatever. And off the back of that, I applied to a one-time run job on Select magazine, which was a kind of Britpop mag. It was like a junior version of Q in a weird way. And I got the job as a trainee writer. They'd never done it before, and they didn't do it since because the mag folded after 3 months. Probably not my fault. And fortunately, off the back of that, because they were owned by the people who put Q out, I went to work for Q as a freelancer, and I freelanced for Q for about 4 years. I would do absolutely anything. There was this one section we don't do anymore called Where Are They Now?, which was the bane of my life for 18 months, where I had to find a band that had split up and ask them what went wrong. And obviously, they don't want to tell you, and particularly if they've got rubbish jobs and stuff. So that's what I had to do. That was always good. And crazy things like getting opera singers to rate rappers and silly things like that. It was a strange time in publishing. People weren't really sure. And then fortunately, NME came along and said, oh, there's a vacancy on our news desk. Do you want to come and do that? So I started as deputy news editor at NME, and then I did... what did I do? I became the news editor. That was good. And during that time I was there was that massive sea change in sort of publishing, where I think I was very much a print journalist. I hadn't done any website publishing for the first 5 years of my career. And we started, I think we did 8 stories a day on NME.com. By the time I'd finished being news editor, because of the pressure and everything, we were doing 30 stories a day. And we were originating stories at the time. Towards the end, I got a little bit worried that we were regurgitating perhaps a bit too much. But off the back of that, then I was promoted again, strangely, against all odds, and ended up running the NME Awards and looking after NME's video content. And against the odds again, I went back to Q to take over the digital stuff.
Okay.
So no career path, no copyable career path at all. Total fluke and happenstance. Sorry.
Okay, that's quite a nice story. Talking about the topic that finds us here today, musical journalism. It seems like these days the people are very interested in musical journalism because, well, we already say why, but it seems like it's getting very serious. I mean, it's like a really tough topic, What can you tell us about the music journalism in a country like England?
Well, music journalism, I would say in Britain and the US, is kind of at a weird crossroads at the moment, I would say. I think English language music journalism, I think you guys who don't trade in English as your first language have a bit of a delay on this. I remember being in France last year and realising the scene was slightly rosier. I think there's a big problem because of the rise of the internet. We're at the crossroads where people are going to have to decide in the next probably couple of years whether they want to pay for music journalism or kind of happy for music writing to be a free thing. When I was growing up, you paid for music mags, and then the kind of bloggers would put together photocopied fanzines, and they'd be about one band or a scene, and it'd be really interesting. Now we're in this position where everyone can be a blogger, which is brilliant. What I thought was going to be quite exciting, though, I think has turned into a little bit of a strange situation, which is twofold. Is one, there is a lot of people in the UK in particular, and I imagine in the US, writing for free and with no chance of ever getting paid, and they do these jobs and they have these titles, but they're never getting paid and they're not getting trained and no one's telling them and no one's feeding back to them, which I think is leading to an overall decline. But in journalism, I mean, there's music writing, and they're two different things, and I think there is an argument to say which one do you want. And the other side of that is it's making it increasingly harder for the business models that old traditional publishers used to have to work. Like advertising in Q is quite low compared to what it was 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, the same for NME. you go to online to try and do that, but you're giving content away for free and you're paying someone to do it. And it's an unlevel playing field. And I think that, like I say, the crossroads we find it with English language music journalism at the moment is firstly, do you want to pay for it? And I think, it's the same with the music debate. So it's not a special thing, and it's music journalism is not a special case. And maybe it's reached the end. I don't know, but I hope not. The other flip side, and the disappointing thing that really I think would make it a lot easier if it had changed, is when I first became aware of blogs, I was like, this is going to be really exciting. You're going to see 20 million different opinions across the internet. Every time an album comes out, it's going to be a rainbow of, I hate it, I love it, I hate it, this is great, this is the best song, actually, this is the best song, actually, it's all awful. And what I found slightly disappointing, particularly in sort of more mainstream rock, for want of a better word, music writing, is there seems to be conservatism springing up, where people tend to mass around one opinion and one accepted orthodoxy of that band are really cool and that band aren't, and if you write nice things about that band, you're clearly an idiot. But if you write nice things about this band, you're really cool and you're one of us. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because I think I'd like to see more opinions out there. If we're going to go to music writing and everyone's going to do it for free, then I think I'd like to see a greater spectrum of ideas and ways of tackling it, rather than this sort of culture of let's all be in the in crowd. Because I mean, it happens, it's peer pressure, I guess. And I guess the flip side of that as well is comments have really pushed it as well. Because if you write an article, I've reviewed some records where I've got it clearly wrong. When I did that 10 years ago, there was no one writing at the bottom of the review going, "Oh, you're an idiot, aren't you?" Whereas now you can write a quite neutral piece and say, the tour dates go on sale on Tuesday, and the person at the bottom's like, "You're an idiot, aren't you?" And I think there is obviously that pressure as well. To be fair to these music writers, it is a quite cutthroat, quite opinionated world. I just wish there were more opinions rather than fewer, but lots of people with one opinion.
Okay, you just mentioned about the internet and the bloggers, and it's kind of funny because you came up from a classical, let's say that way, classical musical journalism school, because you came from this printed world, and now you're in charge of the digital media of this magazine. So what can you tell us about the musical journalism future? I mean, what's next?
What is next? Money, I hope. No, what is exciting, and I quite lucky that I think, like you say, I came through the sort of traditional route of, I did a journalism degree or postgraduate degree, and then I went to work for a magazine, and I had people teaching me how to write and telling me when I was doing it wrong, which is really good. But what is exciting is in this kind of new thing is that when you do it wrong, you can get rid of it and do it again. Whereas before, if you happen to give King Adora's debut album 4 stars, it's there forever, and I urge you not to look that up or even look up who King Adora are, please. And what's exciting is you can try new things. So one of the things I've been doing recently with the Q site is, because we don't have a huge budget to edit videos, is doing audio, because you can do audio really easy. Everyone's got an iPhone. And so we recently did a festival called Festival Number 6, which is in Wales in the UK. And rather than like the usual, you go down, you interview 50 bands, you get home and you think, oh, I've got to write that up now. Oh, God. And eventually do it 3 weeks after the event. What we were doing, we were interviewing people on the site. We weren't editing it. We were sort of saying, pretend it's radio, but you can swear if you want. And just putting it up live. And we did a great one with a chap called Bill Ryder-Jones, who I don't know if you know, he was in The Coral. He's a solo artist now. He plays on the Arctic Monkeys' new album. And we did a great interview with him where halfway through the interview, a samba band walked past. So you've got him going, yeah, and I'm here, record, and in the background, just carried on going, and it just gives you a real sense of the event. And I think that's where the future of music journalism is, trying things out, is bringing those traditional values of journalism and quality and, opinion. I think that's the future. And I think the other side of it, the sort of more boring answer to your question, is there is a hell of a lot of music out there. And I think if you're a passionate music fan who runs a music blog, you might have time to look at 50 million songs a day. I know I don't. I know my friends who are my age don't. And I think there is that gatekeeper role to play, that filter role to play. And I think that music journalism, curating rather than criticising, perhaps, is going to be a lot stronger, and is already a lot stronger in terms of what we do and how we present music to people, by going, you like this, we've listened to it all. This is the bit you want.
Okay, and talking about music, we know you came from this rocky taste. I happen to read your column like every number, so I know you like rock music. I really would like to know what is your perspective about rock music nowadays, because it seems like there is like a lot of roots to hear. What is your personal opinion about this genre in particular?
Yeah, rock music or indie music. I think I call it in the UK, which is completely meaningless now because none of these bands, a few of them are independent. A lot of people have been saying the guitar is dead, and I'm always, it's always a classic thing. Everyone's like, oh, the indie became, I don't know what it's like here, but in the UK, because of Britpop, indie music or guitar music suddenly became mainstream. Whereas before, there was a bunch of us who would go to gigs and you could buy a ticket on the door and you'd all wear horrible looking black t-shirts and it didn't matter. Now, everyone in the UK thinks about, of a certain age thinks about going to gigs. It's completely transformed. And so this has created this culture where everyone goes, well, the guitar music's really dead. Nothing interesting can happen in guitar music now because it's all dance, because it's two guys with a laptop in a basement in Shoreditch. And I keep hearing, guitar music's dead. I keep hearing the album is dead as well, because obviously music fans, they just want to shuffle, they haven't got time. So they don't want to listen to guitar music because it's boring and it's dead, and they don't want to listen to an album's worth. Yet every year that the guitar rock album's death has been predicted, it just gets better. I mean, the Arctic Monkeys album this year, I don't know, I might be alone on this, but I think is an absolute masterpiece of a record. The Daft Punk record, which is really a dance album, it's quite a guitar-heavy record, rock record in a way, a soft rock record perhaps. So I think the genre is as interesting if you can be bothered to go out and find it. And I think this may be, like I was saying before, is our role is to actually go, there is interesting stuff there. You just have to dig down for it. No, it's not to say that other genres aren't, dance is incredibly interesting at the moment, and where you can go with that, and the crossover between avant-garde and almost classical composition and dance is really fascinating to me as well at the moment. But I would say we live in a time now where the ability to make music is so easy. You don't need a studio, you don't need a producer, you don't need a wad of money. You need a laptop, you need some talent perhaps, maybe not. You need an idea. That I think it's a potentially exciting time for lots of ideas. The real danger is making sure they don't get missed, and the other thing is making sure that you do it properly. You don't just rush it out and it sounds awful. But I think guitar music in particular it's all right.
Okay, and you just tell us about your personal taste, which is rock music, but sometimes that we get asked a lot of the time is that how does a journalist do to get aside your musical taste from what you write? In your personal experience, what would you say is the difficult part of this encounter between your personal taste and what you have to write and to investigate?
Absolutely. I mean, when I was doing news for the NME, I stopped writing reviews because you had to talk to people all the time, and you had to be that sort of neutral character where you go, so tell us about your new record then. That's great. I don't really like. And there was the classic phrase we always had was nice guy, shit band. And it was always like, these bands, you meet them, they're really nice guys, and you chat away to them, and then and you just have to sort of go, oh yeah, great, yeah. I won't mention names. And there was, so it can be awkward. I think, it depends what you want to do. There are a lot of journalists I've worked with in the past who got really surprised that they would absolutely demolish someone's album in a review and then meet them and that person would be slightly off towards them and they'd be going, well, I can't believe that. You gave them 2 out of 10, come on. Yeah, but they poured their heart into that, come on. So that is difficult, and I've always tried to avoid either reviewing people I've got to interview from a news or neutral point of view, or reviewing friends' records, because as much as you don't get in this to become friends with bands, there are some you become friendly with, and I don't think that's fair. The opposite side, I just go, oh, it's so good. You're just so good. You're really good. Do you want a drink? You're so good. So you've got kind of finding that balance. I think for me, the ultimate recent experience I had of being able to be, it's almost like I was going back before. There's music writing, where you write passionately about music, and there's perhaps music journalism, where you report on music. And I did recently, I went to see Metallica play, who I'd never seen before. I was advised to wear earplugs, which were useful. But I gave heavy metal a go, and I was actually quite surprised how tuneful it was. So there you go. You can do it. It can be done as a journalist. You can go and watch something that you might not like, but it's all right.
Okay, and well, let's talk about your work in Warp magazine. I think like a year ago, you was asked to do an interview for us, actually a cover interview. It was Muse, and you have the opportunity to talk with the 3 members of the band. And that interview make a lot of noise here in Mexico because it was like, wow, these guys have this interview with the 3 members of the band, and it happened that most of the time when you have a cover here in Mexico with a band or an artist, you are very lucky if you get to talk in a phone with one of them. So it was like, oh my God, these guys really go to UK and get to talk to these guys. Well, what the people sometimes don't know is that we have a collaborator already in London. So tell us about this experience. I mean, you actually tell us in the interview that was kind of surprises to the members of the band because they don't expect that you interviewing to a Mexican magazine.
Yeah, it was a bit of a weird. Firstly, can I say I was quite honoured to be asked to write it, and I've only seen it on the iPad edition, so I'm going to get a physical copy and take that home because I've got my first covers framed, so I'll get that done. No, it was very honoured to do it. I had to pretend to my boss I was going somewhere else at lunchtime because I didn't want to get let on that I was interviewing Muse for another magazine just in case someone went, actually, could you get a few quotes for us? Because at the time, Q had an exclusive cover. So we had a guy going out to LA, I think, a couple of days after I went round the corner to interview them in a hotel around the corner from the office with an exclusive interview. So it was a bit of a smoke and mirrors affair. So I went in. I've interviewed Muse quite a bit because when I started at the NME was just when they came into that thing of suddenly being huge. And so you'd end up seeing them pretty much once a month at some big gig where Matt was going to tell you how he was going to explode something over a crowd, or I'm going to turn Wembley into a giant mirror ball or something like that. So they were a little bit surprised. They were like, are you doing it? I'm like, oh, I'm doing it for Warp. And they're like, oh, do you speak Spanish then? I was like, no, don't be silly, sorry. So that was surprising. And there was a very sweet moment, actually, when I was interviewing Matt Bellamy, and we had this massive conversation about entropy and financial collapse and all the stuff he loves to talk about. And then Matt's brilliant. He loves to go off on, he's a real, right, tell us your theories, Matt. He's a real conspiracy theorist. And then out of the blue, he started going, yeah, and we did this gig in Mexico City a few years ago, and there was like we had the tower set, and the crowd was so enthusiastic, and they were jumping up and down, and I was on the tower going, whoa, whoa. And I was like, it's a nice story, but why are you telling me that? And he was like, well, I thought you were doing this for a Mexican magazine. I was like, oh, yes, good. Thank you, Matt. So they kept me straight, actually. So you can probably thank them more for the coverage than anything.
Okay, and for maybe the people who don't know, but we ask you for a column like every month with talking about a different topic. And I really would like to know what is the strangest assignation that we have letting you?
Oh, God. There was one on electric, something about electric, and it was just, can you shoehorn the word electric in somewhere? I don't know, I can't remember. At least that's how I took it. There's one on cheesy love songs, which was kind of came at a really weird point in my life, and I was like, yeah, just go for it. So this is the great thing for me, because it gets translated into Spanish, and I do apologise. I have in person for all the typos and bad English that I send over, which then gets crafted into, I'm sure, wonderful Spanish. I get there's that great freedom where no one I know reads this. No one I know has ever read anything I've written for Warp, so it's great. So you can actually occasionally go, I would never write this in Q, but... So, yeah, there's been a few. I'm trying to think. There was one with Rage Against the Machine, and it was like, can you do something about political... And my degree was in politics. I was like, yeah, let's go for this. And then I kind of hit the brick wall. And what I love about them, though, I mean, I can't remember any particular ones, but what I love is occasionally you get this and you're like, I haven't got a clue. And then you'll be sat on the tube, the underground in London, and you'll suddenly go, hang on, I heard that record the other day, that'll work. And it's really good because sometimes you hear records that someone else is writing about for the mag, or someone else was covering and then you go, brilliant, I'll write for Warp. They can have it. That's great. So yeah. But I do enjoy them. They are a cryptic teaser every month for me.
Okay, I think we're gonna take some questions from our viewers in live stream. So let's see what happens.
There's a lot of people asking about the festivals in the UK. How do you mentally prepare or physically prepare to do a live coverage for a music festival? And I imagine, and everybody knows, they're really big over there.
Yeah, they are actually physically can be quite demanding. Glastonbury, I mean, if people think Glastonbury is this sort of, oh, it's got a good lineup, but it's actually this huge farm in Somerset. It's, you know, it's in a valley. It tends to rain and become incredibly muddy and sticky, and it's actually really hard to get around. You come back from Glastonbury fitter than when you went down there. You were drinking and doing everything, but you still come back fitter. When I was doing NME and we were doing having to watch 8 bands a day, that was really physically demanding, and you would really have to just get your head into this sort of tunnel vision, and you just ignore people. Since I've been at Q, there is a little bit more time. We were a month, you know, I went to, as I was saying, Festival Number 6 recently, and that was, I didn't have to see as many bands, and so I've got this new problem of having to juggle preparing and covering this festival and not spending too long in a beer tent, so which is always a temptation. I guess, you know, the key thing I always found was just make sure you know all the song titles. That was always the big one, always the best advice, because there'd always one where you'd be furiously Googling as your connection went down, and you'd be Googling lyrics. You'd be going, what did he just sing? Oh, no. So yeah, always remember the song titles. And yeah, festivals are pretty big in the UK. It's really exploded in the last sort of 10 years. It used to be like with the gigs, quite a minority thing, but now it really is. You know, Glastonbury sold out last weekend. They haven't announced a single act. No one knows who's playing.
Yeah, I know there's people going crazy right now without tickets, and nobody knows here in the lineup. How do you feel about using tools like social network that everybody can have them in firsthand? How do you use social network for Q Magazine right now?
I think the really important thing to remember about social networks and social media is that they are media. They're not. I often sit in things where people go, yeah, all we need is Twitter and therefore it'll be fine. In fact, I once heard an artist say to a friend of mine who's a press officer, he said, oh, do you want me to do your press on this album? And the guy went, nah, I don't need press, mate. I've got Twitter. Seriously. And it's not, because, you know, when we were at NME, or I was at NME, the audience would go, you're an idiot a lot, or that was great, or they'd come back. Q, they're older. They don't want to have a conversation with an imaginary magazine. They want to know stuff. They want information. They want to move on. So I think whatever you do with social media, it's a really useful tool. It's just remember who the audience is and don't presume that there is one person who archetype. You know, there's always that somebody said to me once in a meeting, oh, the reason no one responds is because you're not asking the right questions. It's like, no, the reason no one responds is because you've got better things to do.
Yeah, exactly. Alex from Warp. How are you? We were talking at the office earlier today, and you were saying about the festivals that you're visiting this year. For example, I don't know, Primavera Sound at Spain, etc. And we also talk about Lollapaloozas in South America. Are you surprised of any new market in the world that some festivals are happening there? Are you surprised that these kind of events are happening in a place like Mexico or Chile or Argentina or even Spain with several brands of festivals, or Tel Aviv almost have a Lollapalooza, etc.? Are you surprised of that? And I want to know your opinion about what we also talked earlier before of Corona Capital and the decision of the programmers to not include any talents from Spain or Latin America.
Yeah, I'm surprised how festivals have taken off as a global thing, because I mean, I always remember going to Glastonbury in 1995, my very first festival, and remember thinking, God, this is hard work, isn't it? You just stand around for days, and sleep in a tent and watch bands, and you know, you've got to really love music for this, but the popularity, and it's not, you know, it's happened in the UK, and then I went to Korea to review or interview Metallica, and they had a festival there in the Olympic Stadium, and it was absolutely mental. You know, everyone goes on about Scottish crowds being the West in the world. I would say Korean crowds give them a very good run for their money. They're awfully polite, they queue up, and then they go absolutely ballistic. And I was really surprised. It was, you know, the same sort of blueprint goes on around the world. There's obviously something quite universal that it taps into. I think it's that sense of occasion, that sense of space. I remember somebody saying to me, you can't get festivals to work in America. This was about 10 years ago. We just don't work. And now, I mean, how many festivals are there in America? And it's great. I mean, it makes so much more sense, I think, to have festivals in places like Mexico, because it probably doesn't get as muddy as it does in Somerset in June, in the so-called English summer. So I am surprised in one sense, but on the other sense, I mean, I kept going back, so I can see why. To answer your second point, so I can make enemies on your local scene. How many hours have I been here? I didn't realise. I looked up the lineup of the festival yesterday. I hadn't really paid attention to it was on. I was more sort of running around because our Q Awards are coming up. And I was, wow, what an amazing lineup! And I couldn't see any local acts, and I assumed it was either going to be a secondary stage or something like that. So I was quite surprised to learn that there wasn't any local acts playing, because I mean, when I went to Primavera, I saw quite a few local acts from Spain and indeed across Europe. The festival I was just mentioning, Festival Number 6, had a Welsh language stage. You know, that's for a British audience to showcase that. Glastonbury often gets acts around the world in. I think it's a shame, and as a visitor, I would like to have seen some, but I don't know what the reasoning is behind that. Hopefully next year.
You will see Caloncho tomorrow.
Good.
But I mean, with the music industry in the UK, you have a very wealthy local scene, and that local scene is very mainstream in the world in general. It's also like a next big thing, music industry. You are always like seeking and searching for the next one and the next one, and sometimes it's very cruel with some acts, etc. And we also ask you things about your music industry, because we in Mexico, we feel like, you know, in the UK you have the most amazing music industry and the music press, etc. And then you have teachers through your text and your words that it's not that different, and it's there's a lot of obstacles also in your music scene, in your music industry, etc. But I want to ask you this time about that, about what can you see of this industry in Mexico, of the few experiences that you have with us through WARP, etc. And what can you tell us about the wealthiness of the UK music industry right now? What's happening there? What things change in the few years, etc.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm always surprised, and maybe you just take it for granted because you live there, but I'm always surprised by the interest in the British music scene from around the world, because you could cut it an entirely different way and forget all the buzz bands and just cut it as that, you know, we're the country that sent Venga Boys to #1, you know. We've got some really, our charts are shocking, really. I mean, you know, our gig scene's great. Our chart, you know, the actual records that get bought, I mean, you know, we are as bad or as good as any other country. I think there is a real interest in new talent in the UK. I think audiences are more receptive to it. I think there's a potentially within the British music industry, there's an obsession with the next big thing, which is getting a little bit out of hand. I remember certain bands coming back on 3rd or 4th albums and people are not interested anymore. Like, well, no, hang on. They're the bands we should be engaging with as much as the new ones. And equally, I remember talking to fans who were going, oh, I really love the first single by that band. And then you go, what do you think of the second single? Never heard it, not interested. That was 3 months ago. You know, what about the album? So I think you have to be really careful. And I think, you know, perhaps the obsession with new in the UK perhaps needs to calm down slightly. It just seems to be a bit, but I think the internet does drive. There is that real, I saw it first. And I think that's a very London thing, actually. It might not even be a British thing. I think it's very London. The sort of industry is based in one town, and you know, everyone goes to gigs and say, oh, I saw this, and have you signed that? Did you sign that? I'm signing that. And it's great. You can go to certain buzz gigs now and you see the same, you see A&Rs from every label. You can sort of work out where a band are at. And there's one band I saw recently where I was getting texts afterwards going, what did you think of it? Well, I'm not paying. You don't pay me and I'll tell you. In terms of what I've seen with my experiences from Warp, I think it's a lot easier to cross in. I think although it helps if you can come and play London, it's a lot easier now, and I think music fans are a lot more receptive. I think in the old days, if you were into a band, you'd have to find someone in your town, and then you'd form a little scene, and then you'd get into it. Now you can find someone online, and I think that makes it a lot easier for bands to come over. I think if there's a shared interest, and so if you're a punk band from Mexico, you can probably find someone in London who will share your interest, or Toronto, or wherever. It's obviously hard if you're not singing English for some reason, but equally, that seems to be changing as well. I mean, I was listening to a French garage rock band this morning, so yeah, I think the state of the British music industry at the moment is good. It could do better, I think, which is probably the same for the global music industry. But it does seem to have turned a corner a bit. I get a sense that people are cooperating a little bit more. I think people, particularly in the indie sector, because I judge an awards for the Association of Independent Music, and I get the sense that, yes, they're competing with each other, but they actually slap each other on the back when they do well, whereas traditionally the British music scene had been stabbing each other in the back. So it seems to be, I think as it's got smaller, it's got slightly more communal, and long may that continue.
Okay, I think that was the last question. So just want to thank you, Paul, for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
For joining to our celebration. And you actually are going to join us in our Corona Capital coverage, right?
Yes.
Okay.
On record.
That's going to be fun.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Gracias a todos por seguir este streaming. Y pues bueno, lo pueden encontrar ya a partir de unas horas completamente a través del canal oficial de Warp Magazine y el resumen en la página de WARP.la. Mañana tenemos la fiesta de aniversario con Blondie, White Lies, Caloncho, Poolside y bueno, los que todavía no tengan boleto, córranle porque se van a acabar. Y esto es todo. Muchas gracias. Nos vemos en la próxima. Adiós.